The night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. Mist curled over the forest like soft silver smoke, and the full moon hung low, painting everything in a cold, pale light. In a small village at the edge of the forest, children had long since been sent home by anxious parents. But one little girl, no more than 8, had slipped away. Her name was Ilara, and her curiosity had always been stronger than her fear. Ilara tiptoed along the narrow path that led into the woods. Her small feet made little sound on the damp earth, and her eyes sparkled with excitement and a strange courage that no one her age usually held. Stories told by villagers haunted the edges of her mind. Tales of a vampire who lived in the old castle atop the hill. He was said to be ancient, cruel, and fearsome. And yet, rather than fear, Ilara felt pity for him. She imagined that living alone for centuries would be lonelier than anything else in the world. The castle loomed ahead, dark and silent, its towers reaching like fingers toward the sky. Its walls were blackened with age, and ivy clung stubbornly to its sides. Most villagers would never dare come this close. But Ilara's heart beat not with fear, but with curiosity. Somewhere inside, she felt that the vampire was not as cruel as the stories said. Perhaps he was lonely. Perhaps he simply needed a friend. She stepped closer, brushing her hand against the cold stone. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a chill that made her shiver. And then she saw him, Darien. He was nothing like the monsters of legend. His skin was pale, almost luminous under the moonlight, and his eyes were dark pools that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. His black hair fell in soft waves, framing a face that was both handsome and sorrowful. He stood in the shadows of the castle gate, tall and silent, watching her with a calm intensity that made her heart skip. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "I wanted to see you," Ilara said, her small chest rising and falling with determination. "Everyone says you're scary, but I don't think you are." Darien raised an eyebrow, amused but wary. "And why do you think that, little one?" "Because you're alone," she said simply. "Lonely people aren't scary. They just need someone to care." The words struck him more than he wanted to admit. He had lived for centuries, and no human had ever spoken to him like this, not with curiosity, not with courage, and certainly not with kindness. He studied her, trying to see if fear might mask some hidden danger. But her eyes were honest, bright, and unafraid. "Your parents," he began, but she waved him off. "They don't understand. They think everything is dangerous. But I can see more than they do." Darien was silent, torn between concern and a strange longing he did not fully understand. He had avoided humans for so long, but here was one who dared to step closer, unafraid. And then, she said something that made him stop entirely. "I'll be your bride when I turn 18, she said, her small voice steady, as if she had known it all along. For a long moment, Darien did not move. He blinked, once, twice. The words were so simple, so childish, and yet they carried a weight that he could feel pressing against his chest. A promise. A vow made from innocence, yet charged with power. You are too young," he said carefully, hiding the storm inside. "This is impossible." Ilara tilted her head. He felt something inside him twist. Desire, patience, fear, and hope all mingled in a strange, painful knot. The idea of waiting for her, of keeping her safe through the years, was overwhelming. And yet, he found himself nodding. "Very well," he said finally. "I will wait." The child smiled. And for the first time in centuries, Darien felt something he had thought lost forever. A flicker of warmth. "All there's right, and rest dry," she laughed softly. A sound like wind through leaves. and turned to run back toward the village. But the forest was not safe. Shadows moved in the undergrowth. Villagers who feared the forest and the vampire had decided to destroy it, torching the edges with torches and crude tools. Ilara ran, but the fire crackled dangerously close. Panic rose in her chest, and she screamed for help. Darian moved faster than human eyes could follow, stepping into the flames and shadows. His speed was unnatural, his presence commanding. In moments, he lifted Ilara into his arms and carried her out of danger. She clung to him, her small hands gripping his cloak. "You saved me," she whispered, wide-eyed. "Yes," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "And I will always protect you, no matter the cost." That night, Darian returned her to her home, careful not to reveal too much of his true nature. Her parents, oblivious to the danger she had faced, scolded her gently for wandering. But Ilara only smiled inwardly, knowing the truth of the promise she had made and the vow he had silently accepted. In the following days, Darian retreated to his castle, a shadow among shadows. Yet, he found himself thinking of her often. Her bravery, her innocence, and the promise she had spoken echoed in his mind like a haunting melody. Centuries had made him cautious, bitter, and isolated. Yet now, a seed of something new had been planted. A reason to endure, to wait, and perhaps to hope. As the seasons passed, Ilara grew stronger, braver, and more curious. She would visit the edge of the forest, speaking to the shadows, hoping for a glimpse of the pale figure who had saved her. And though he remained distant, Darian watched over her from the dark, unseen, and silent, ensuring she was safe from harm. The world around them was harsh and unforgiving. The kingdom whispered of darkness, of witches, and of creatures that lurked in the night. But neither the villagers' fear nor the dangers of the forest could break the fragile bond forming between the lonely vampire and the small girl who had promised him her heart. One night, under the same silver moon that had witnessed their first meeting, Darian stood atop his castle tower, gazing down at the village lights. He thought of Ilara, small and brave, and the vow they had exchanged. Centuries of solitude had not prepared him for this feeling, a quiet, aching anticipation. And yet, even as hope stirred, the world remained dangerous. Shadows shifted in the woods, and whispers of dark forces, moving in the kingdom, reached his ears. He knew, deep in his immortal bones, that their story had only begun. The promise she had made was innocent, but it carried consequences neither of them fully understood. Darian turned away from the moonlit village and descended into the cold halls of his castle. The wind moaned through broken windows, carrying with it the scent of distant storms and unseen dangers. He knew that protecting her would not be simple. Enemies would come, and fate would test them both. But he also knew that he would wait, no matter how long it took. Because some promises, even those spoken by a child, were stronger than the years. And some bonds, forged in courage and kindness, could not be broken even by time, fear, or darkness. As the castle clock struck midnight, a shadow moved at the edge of the forest. Darian's eyes narrowed, sensing a presence he had not felt before. Danger was coming for Ilara, an enemy unseen, a force that would challenge the promise and the bond they had begun. He clenched his fists, feeling the cold pulse of centuries in his veins. This was only the beginning. And somewhere in the distance, Ilara's small voice whispered into the night, unaware of the peril approaching. "I'll be your bride when I turn 18. The seasons changed slowly in the village at the edge of the forest. Spring came with soft rain, summer with bright sunlight, and winter with frost that painted the trees in silver. Through it all, Ilara grew. She was no longer the small, fearless child who had run into the forest that first night. Now, at 15, she had grown taller, her hair falling like waves of gold, and her eyes held a depth that made people notice her wherever she went. And yet, despite the changes around her, one thing remained the same: her connection to Darien, the vampire she had promised to marry when she turned 18. She felt it often like a faint pull at her heart, a whisper she could not explain. Sometimes she would wander to the forest's edge, feeling the shadows and hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Darien had watched her from afar all these years, always careful not to be seen. He had kept her safe, quietly moving through the woods, ensuring no harm ever reached her. But the years had brought him something new, an ache he could not ignore. He realized that the child who had made a promise had grown into a young woman of courage and grace. And though he had sworn to remain patient, his heart sometimes betrayed him, yearning for the impossible. One afternoon, a soft wind carried news to the village. Strange occurrences had begun in the surrounding forest. Crops withered overnight, animals vanished, and travelers spoke of shadows moving in impossible ways. Villagers whispered of witches and dark magic. Ilara's parents dismissed the tales, warning her not to wander too far. But Ilara's mind was already elsewhere. She felt it before she saw it, the pull in her chest, the whisper that guided her steps. She knew Darien was near, waiting in the shadows as he always did. She crept through the trees, careful not to alert anyone, and approached the castle. It looked smaller now in daylight, less threatening, but still magnificent. Its towers were sharp against the sky, and the ivy seemed almost alive, climbing hungrily. "Darien," she called softly. From the shadows, he emerged, his form as silent as the mist around him. He looked at her with a mixture of surprise and caution. "Ilara," he said, "you should not come here alone." "I can take care of myself," she said, though she was aware of the truth. Without him, she was still vulnerable. "But I wanted to see you. I wanted to talk." He studied her carefully, noting how her voice had matured, how her gaze held determination and something more, an understanding that had grown over the years. "Talk," he repeated, his voice lower, almost a whisper of curiosity. "Very well. But you must stay safe." They walked together along the castle's stone paths, shadows stretching long in the afternoon sun. Darien told her stories of the past, of times when humans had feared him, of centuries spent in solitude, and of battles fought that no one remembered. Ilara listened, fascinated. She realized that the vampire was not just a creature of legend, but a being of knowledge, sorrow, and power. "You have waited a long time for me," she said softly, almost shyly. "I have waited longer than you can imagine," he replied. His gaze softened. "Patience is the only thing I have mastered in centuries." Ilara smiled. "And yet, you are not always patient with yourself, are you?" He did not answer at once. He could not. She had seen through him in ways no human ever had. The truth of his loneliness, his restraint, and his longing for her presence had been hidden from the world. But she understood it intuitively. Days turned into weeks, and their secret meetings continued. Ilara learned to move through the forest quietly, to read the subtle signs of magic and danger, and to understand the quiet strength that Darien carried within him. She discovered that she had a rare sensitivity, an ability to sense the shadows and even glimpse the flow of magic in the world. Darien watched her grow, teaching her how to focus, to defend herself, and to trust her instincts. And yet, the world around them did not remain calm. The whispers of dark forces grew louder. A coven of witches in the kingdom had begun to notice the unusual bond between the girl and the vampire. They saw opportunity in the promise she had made, and they sought to exploit it for their own gain. Strange events began to plague the forest. Trees that shifted in impossible ways, animals that appeared twisted or frightened, and shadows that seemed to move with intent. One evening, as the moon rose high and painted the world in silver, Ilara felt a pull stronger than before. She followed it, walking cautiously, until she entered a small clearing where the air seemed charged with tension. Darian appeared from the shadows, silent and watchful. "You feel it too, don't you?" Ilara whispered. He nodded. "Something approaches. Something that does not belong to this world." Ilara's heart raced, but she did not step back. Instead, she took a deep breath and met his eyes. "Then we face it together," she said. Darian hesitated. She was still young, still mortal. And yet, the courage in her words reminded him of the promise she had made long ago. The pull between them, unspoken but undeniable, urged him to stand by her side, no matter the danger. Suddenly, shadows shifted at the edge of the clearing. Figures cloaked in dark robes emerged from the trees. Their eyes glowed faintly, and they whispered incantations in a language older than the village itself. Ilara felt the air grow heavy, the power pressing down on her chest. Darian stepped forward, placing himself between her and the approaching threat. His presence was commanding, and the shadows seemed to hesitate before him. His eyes glowed faintly, revealing the power he had long restrained. "Leave her," he commanded, his voice echoing with a strength that made the witches falter. One of the cloaked figures laughed softly. "She is more powerful than you realize, vampire. And the bond you share with her is tempting." Ilara stepped closer to Darian instinctively, her hand brushing against his cloak. She could feel his strength, his patience, and his restraint. It comforted her, but it also made her aware of the danger they faced. The witches were not just testing him. They wanted to disrupt the bond she had promised and claim it for themselves. Darian's gaze hardened. "I will not allow you to harm her. Not now, not ever." The witches moved closer, and the air seemed to crackle with tension. Ilara realized that this was the first time she had truly seen Darian fight, not just with strength, but with the full force of his presence. Shadows bent around him, and the wind seemed to carry his voice farther than sound should travel. But even as the witches retreated slightly, one of them hurled a dark charm toward Ilara. It struck the ground and released a cloud of black mist. She coughed and stumbled, fear washing over her. Darian acted instantly, moving faster than she could comprehend. He swept her into his arms and disappeared into the forest, carrying her away from the danger. They emerged in a hidden glade, safe for the moment. Ilara's chest heaved with fear and excitement. "You saved me," she whispered, looking up at him. "I will always save you," he said quietly. "No matter what it takes." The danger had passed for now, but the encounter had left a mark. Darian realized that her sensitivity to magic made her both powerful and vulnerable, and the witch's interest meant that their lives would never be truly quiet again. Ilara looked up at him, eyes wide and earnest. "I made a promise to you," she said softly, "and I will keep it." Darian felt a pang of something he could not name. Hope, desire, fear. He had waited centuries for something, and perhaps, unknowingly, he had been waiting for her. "And I will keep my promise as well," he said. "I will protect you, no matter the years, no matter the danger." As they sat together in the glade, the moonlight streaming through the trees, a quiet understanding passed between them. The world was dangerous, dark forces lurked, and the promise she had made carried more weight than either of them fully understood. And yet, the bond between them was growing, delicate yet strong, built on trust, courage, and a promise spoken long ago. But danger never sleeps. From the shadows of the forest, eyes watched, dark magic stirred. The witches would not give up so easily, and the kingdom itself whispered of powers rising beyond human understanding. Darian's patience and restraint would be tested as never before. And as Ilara leaned against him, unaware of the true scale of what was coming, Darian's heart clenched. He could feel it, an approaching storm that threatened not just her life, but the bond they had begun to weave. He whispered, almost to himself. No matter what comes, I will not fail you, Ilara. Not now. Not ever. And somewhere deep in the forest, the shadows seemed to shift with intent, as if the world itself waited to test the promise of a lonely vampire and the little girl who had dared to make a vow under the silver moon. The years had passed, and Ilara was no longer the curious child who had first wandered into the forest. At 17, she had grown into a young woman of remarkable courage and grace. Her hair shimmered like sunlight through the trees, and her eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had faced dangers few could imagine. Yet, even with her strength, she still felt the pull of the shadows, the presence that had been with her all her life. Darian, the vampire, who had waited for her promise. Darian watched her from the castle's highest tower, his dark eyes following her movements in the village below. She trained herself in secret, guided by his teachings, learning to read the subtle currents of magic that whispered in the world. He had taught her to listen to the wind, to sense danger, and to understand her own growing power. And yet, despite the years and her strength, he remained vigilant. One misstep, one moment of carelessness, and the world could take her from him. On a cool autumn evening, Ilara arrived at the forest edge, carrying her training tools and a small satchel. Darian waited in the shadows, his figure blending with the trees, as always. She felt his presence immediately, the invisible tether that had tied them together since childhood. "You are late," he said softly, his voice like velvet over stone. "Traffic," she said, smiling, though the tension in her chest betrayed her nerves. "I wanted to practice something new." He stepped closer, and the air seemed to shift around him. There was a strength, an intensity, in his presence that made her heart race. Yet she did not step back. "I am ready," she said. Darian nodded, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. "Good. Today, you will test your senses in the forest. Remember what I taught you. Trust yourself." Ilara stepped into the trees, her senses alert. She could feel the magic in the soil, the subtle shift of life in the forest, and the hidden dangers that lurked beyond the light. Shadows twisted unnaturally, evidence of forces she could not yet name. The witches had not forgotten her, and she knew that each day brought new threats, unseen, but real. As she moved deeper into the forest, Darian followed silently. He did not need to hide from her. She could sense him easily now. But he chose to remain partly in shadow, a guardian, unseen, a reminder of the patience and restraint that had defined him for centuries. Hours passed, and the training continued. Ilara moved with grace and focus, dodging hidden traps, sensing the presence of wildlife, and practicing spells she had learned in secret from Darian. Each success strengthened her confidence, yet each challenge reminded her of her mortality. She was human, after all, and he was eternal. After the exercises, they returned to a small clearing where the light of the setting sun filtered through the trees. Darian leaned against an ancient oak, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You have grown strong," he said, "perhaps stronger than I expected." Ilara smiled, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "Stronger, yes, but I am still not ready for the world outside this forest. There are forces I cannot control." He studied her, seeing both the strength and the vulnerability that made her human. "Strength is not enough. You will need wisdom, patience, and courage. And you will need to trust me when danger comes." Her gaze dropped to the ground, and for a moment, silence stretched between them. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of unspoken longing, respect, and the weight of the promise she had made years ago. Before Darian could speak further, a strange chill swept through the forest. The trees groaned, shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the birds fell silent. Ilara's senses tingled with warning, and she turned to Darian. "They are here," she whispered. From the darkness at the edge of the clearing, figures emerged. Cloaked in black. Their eyes glowed with a faint, unnatural light. The witches who had watched her for years had come, drawn by her growing power and the bond she shared with Darian. Darian moved to stand in front of her. His presence alone seemed to push the shadows back, but the witches were not deterred. They whispered incantations, weaving spells that twisted the air and made the trees bend unnaturally. Elara stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly, though her resolve was strong. "I am ready," she said, her voice steady. "We face them together." Darian's gaze softened as he looked at her. She had grown into the promise she had made, brave and determined, but still human. "Be careful," he said. "Do not underestimate them. They seek more than power, they seek to break us." The witches advanced, and the tension in the clearing thickened. Shadows twisted and grew, forming shapes that reached toward Elara. She felt the magic brushing against her skin, cold and sharp, but she remembered Darian's lessons. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself, and then focused on the flow of power within her. With a wave of her hand, she sent a pulse of energy into the shadows. The darkness shuddered and recoiled, giving them a brief moment of advantage. Darian moved beside her, his eyes glowing faintly as he extended his own power to shield them. Together, they formed a barrier of strength, human and vampire intertwined, a bond stronger than the dark magic around them. The witches hissed in frustration, their spells faltering against the combined power. But they were relentless. One of them hurled a charm toward Elara, releasing a cloud of black mist that coiled around her like a serpent. She struggled against it, coughing and stumbling, her senses overwhelmed. Darian acted instantly. With a speed that made her head spin, he reached her side, sweeping her into his arms and disappearing into the forest before the witches could react. The mist followed them for a moment, then dispersed against the protective barrier he had conjured. In the hidden glade, safe for the moment, Elara clung to him, her breathing heavy. I almost lost control," she admitted, fear and awe mingling in her voice. "You did not," he said softly. "You are learning, and that is what matters. But remember, every encounter will be harder. The world will not wait for your strength to grow. Danger is always patient." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with determination. "I will be ready, and I will keep my promise. Always." Darian felt the weight of her words. The promise, once a childish vow, had grown into something far more powerful, something that could bind their fates in ways neither of them fully understood. He realized that the danger surrounding them was not just physical. It was a test of trust, of patience, and of the bond they shared. As the night settled over the forest, Darian led her back to the edge of the village. They walked in silence, the tension of the day giving way to quiet reflection. Elara's thoughts were a mix of fear and excitement, understanding for the first time the magnitude of the promise she had made and the depth of the vampire's patience. "You are no longer a child," he said quietly. "You have grown, but so has the danger. You must always remember that. I will protect you, but I cannot shield you from every threat." "I understand," she said. "And I trust you, Darian. Always." He looked at her, and for a moment, the centuries between them felt both vast and insignificant. He saw not just the young woman she had become, but the bond that had formed over years of care, vigilance, and quiet understanding. And he knew, with a certainty he had not felt in ages, that he could not deny her when the time came. But even as they parted for the night, a new threat lingered in the shadows. The witches had retreated for now, but their intentions were clear. They would return, more prepared and more determined to disrupt the promise and the bond that had grown between the vampire and the girl. Darian remained at the castle tower, his eyes scanning the forest below. He felt the stirrings of magic and danger in the air, and he knew that the next year would test them both in ways neither could predict. Ilara's 18th birthday was approaching, and with it, the full weight of the promise they had shared long ago. The moon rose high, silver and cold, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Darian whispered into the night, almost to himself, "I will not fail you, Ilara. Not now, not ever." And somewhere, beyond the trees and shadows, the witches plotted, their eyes glinting with dark anticipation. The storm was coming, and it would demand courage, patience, and sacrifice from both the vampire and the young woman who had dared to make a promise under the moonlight so many years ago. The night of Ilara's 18th birthday arrived with a sky full of stars, silver and cold, as if the world itself was watching. The forest lay quiet, its shadows stretched long under the glow of the full moon. Ilara stood at its edge, her heart pounding with anticipation. Years of training, of waiting, and of growing had led to this night. She was no longer the small girl who had promised a lonely vampire her heart. She was a young woman, strong, confident, and ready to embrace the promise she had made so long ago. Darian waited in the shadows, his figure blending with the moonlight. He had been patient for centuries, watching over her, guiding her, protecting her. And now, the time had come. He felt a storm of emotions, pride, longing, fear, and hope. The centuries of loneliness weighed on him less tonight, replaced by the undeniable pull of the bond they had nurtured. "Ilara," he said softly, stepping from the shadows. His eyes, dark and deep, held a warmth that made her chest ache. "I am ready," she replied, her voice steady, though her heart fluttered like wings of a bird. Together, they walked toward the clearing that had been their secret meeting place for years. The air seemed to hum with energy, a mix of anticipation and the unseen magic that had always lingered around them. The forest, which had once been a place of danger, now felt alive with possibility, as if it celebrated her coming of age. But danger still lingered. The witches who had long sought to claim the bond between Ilara and Darian had returned. They emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight, their presence as menacing as the night itself. Darian stepped forward, placing himself between Ilara and the approaching threat. Shadows seemed to bend around him, protective and commanding. "They will not touch you," he said, his voice low and firm. "Not tonight." Ilara nodded, her own power resonating within her. She had grown strong, her sensitivity to magic heightened, and her courage unwavering. "Then, we face them together," she said. The witches hissed and began to chant, weaving spells that twisted the very air. Darkness moved unnaturally, forming shapes that reached for them. But Darian and Ilara stood united. He extended his power outward, and she mirrored him, their combined strength forming a barrier that held back the shadowy assault. For the first time, Ilara felt the full weight of their bond. Their energies intertwined, human and vampire, mortal and immortal, creating a force that neither darkness nor magic could easily overcome. The witches faltered, their spells losing power against the unity and trust shared between the two. But the witches were relentless. One of them threw a dark charm that exploded into a cloud of black mist, swirling around Ilara. She struggled to breathe, fear rising, but she focused, drawing on the lessons Darian had taught her over the years. She shaped the energy within her, turning the mist into harmless smoke that dissipated under the glow of their combined power. Darian watched her, a surge of pride and relief washing over him. She had grown beyond the small child, who had made a promise in the moonlight. She was ready, in every way. Yet, even as he felt hope, he remained vigilant. Danger had always been patient, and tonight would not be different. The witches recoiled, realizing that the bond between vampire and human was far stronger than they had anticipated. One of them, desperate, hurled herself toward Ilara with a final spell. Darien moved faster than the eye could follow, intercepting the attack with a forceful barrier that sent the witch sprawling to the ground. Elara stood beside him, her hands glowing faintly with power, her heart steady. "We are stronger together," she said, her voice carrying both conviction and warmth. Darien nodded, his dark eyes softening as he looked at her. "Yes," he said, "and this bond is more powerful than any curse, any magic, or any enemy." The witches, defeated for the moment, vanished into the forest, leaving behind only whispers and a lingering sense of unease. Darien lowered his hand, and the protective energy around them faded. The clearing was quiet once more, bathed in silver light. Elara turned to him, her eyes shining. "It's over. For now," she said, though she knew that darkness would never fully disappear. Darien took her hand, his touch gentle yet firm. "The danger may never end," he said, "but our bond is eternal. We will face whatever comes, together." She smiled, feeling the depth of his words and the truth behind them. "I promised you," she said softly, "and I will keep it. Always." He leaned closer, his presence both comforting and thrilling. "And I will keep my promise as well," he said, "to protect you, to wait for you, and to stand by your side, no matter what the world brings." The forest seemed to respond to their words, the trees swaying gently as if in approval, and the wind carrying a soft, almost musical whisper through the clearing. For the first time, Darien allowed himself to hope that their future, though uncertain, was something beautiful, something worth guarding for eternity. Elara stepped closer, her gaze meeting his. "I am ready for whatever comes," she said, her voice steady, filled with determination and courage. "And I am ready for you." Darien's heart, long unused to such emotions, felt a warmth he had thought lost to the centuries. The bond that had begun as a promise from a little girl had grown into something profound: trust, loyalty, and a connection that transcended fear, danger, and even time. As the moon reached its zenith, they stood together in the clearing, hand in hand. The bond between them glowed faintly, a visible pulse of energy that reflected their unity. Shadows moved around them, but they no longer seemed threatening. Instead, the darkness felt like a backdrop, highlighting the light of the bond they had formed. "Do you feel it?" Elara asked, sensing the magic in the air, the energy that had always surrounded them. "I do," Darien said. "It is the promise you made, the bond we have nurtured, and the power we hold together. Nothing can break it." The night stretched on, and for a moment, they allowed themselves to simply exist together, free from fear, free from expectation. The years of waiting, of growing, and of enduring had led to this moment. The promise of the moonlight had been fulfilled, not just in words, but in the depth of their connection. Yet even as they embraced the quiet, Darien knew that the world beyond the forest would never rest. The witches might return, and other dangers could arise. But for the first time, he felt certain that they could face anything. Their bond, born of innocence, courage, and centuries of care, had become a force neither darkness nor time could undo. He lifted his gaze to the stars above, the same stars that had witnessed their first meeting so many years ago. "Whatever comes," he said softly, "we face it together. Your life, your promise, your heart, they are mine to protect, as mine will always be yours." Elara smiled, feeling the truth of his words. The forest seemed to hold its breath one last time, the wind whispering through the leaves, carrying the promise of a bond forged under moonlight, strengthened by courage, and sealed by love. The witches, the darkness, and the dangers of the world could wait. For now, because this night belonged to them, human and vampire, promise and bond, waiting and fulfillment finally united. As they walked back to the castle together, side by side, the moonlight bathed them in silver, a quiet reminder that some promises are stronger than time, and some bonds are eternal. The world outside might never fully sleep, but inside the forest, under the gaze of the stars, two hearts had found a place where they could endure, together, forever.